Hello and welcome to your weekly briefing for Stronghold Kingdoms Global Conflict 1. This week I'll be covering days 67 to 73 and doing my best, as usual, to attempt to document the various political changes that have occurred within the world within that time frame. To get started, I would like to update you on the House alliances. So starting with the upper left, as per usual, we have House 2 occupying Canada in their alliance. We have House 2, House 7, which is, right there. House 12, which is largely in China and a little bit here in Germany. House 6, now this was a recent addition that was made last week. I believe I pointed it out. And House 3, which was also a recent addition last week. Moving down, we have the United States of America, controlled by House 15 and House 18, both of which are sister houses. New to this alliance, we have House 4, which was formerly in the House 17, House 16, House 20 alliance. So that was new. You may recall they left in an attempt to make peace with House 19 on their own, but obviously that hasn't panned out, so now they have moved on to another house that was willing to accept them. Moving down to South America, we have House 10 in an alliance with House 11, and new to this alliance is House 14. Now, House 14 is still pretty scarce on the map, and I can't readily point to an area they control, but that is the word that I got, is now House 10 and 11 are working with House 14. Of course, we have House 19 still allies with House 5, House 8, and House 13, and pretty much has the entire world still united against them. Down in Australia, we have House 17, House 16, and House 20. Nothing really has changed there. And playing all by itself, we have House 1, which is all but been destroyed or rendered inactive. A lot of the players that are still in it are in vacation mode currently, which is really to be expected, considering that, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, the vacation limit resets at the start of the new year. So I think we'll tackle the biggest issue first, literally. House 19 has retaken the Scandinavian peninsula from House 2. You may recall last week, House 2 controlled this entire peninsula right here. It turns out, a lot of House 19 players were still in these parishes. They were just not holding the parishes. So, once a lot more of them came out of vacation mode, they readily flipped those counties right back to themselves, and now House 19 owns it again. And it should also be noted that, House 19, a lot of their players are coming back from vacation mode. You may have noticed that Spartak 1987 is back now as the House Marshal of House 19, because being charismatic enough to be able to coordinate that many houses efficiently is pretty much unparalleled in this world. We've not seen an alliance as big as House 19 that was self-contained. It took 4 other alliances to work against them to really make them fight hard for what they're doing. So, if you consider the amount of power that Spartak holds over the rest of the world, or in comparison to the rest of the world, he is a very good player in pretty much all senses of the world, and an extremely good leader. I don't think anybody would deny this after seeing how he's played. Of course, some could say that a better leader wouldn't have gotten House 19 involved in a worldwide war this soon, but I think you have to realize that after what happened in Europe, it was pretty much inevitable that the other houses would be suspicious of activity done by House 19, and they were hip to what House 19 was up to, so they weren't going to leave them alone anyway. Unless, of course, they became less of a threat to the glory race, I suppose. But regarding this world war, House 19 met with the other major players in this war, and they did attempt to negotiate a ceasefire, but both sides wanted more land from the other than either were willing to concede, so that pretty much went nowhere. And now House 19 is largely focusing over here on House 17, a lot of Chinese lands. That's where a lot of their military focus is, and also they've started sending some players over into Canada. As you can see over here towards Vancouver on the west coast, there are more House 19 players making an appearance, and that could be a concern, because most recently this little island here was flipped by House 19. But of course, that is nothing compared to what was lost in the Scandinavian peninsula when House 19 pretty much jumped back into action and retook that. And I'm not a House 19 fanboy or anything. I may have said a lot of positive things about them, but that is because what they've done is really, in my book, quite extraordinary. To be able to unite an entire world against your one alliance is pretty unparalleled. We saw a lot of unique geography with the introduction of the Global Conflict 1 server. This is the first worldwide server that we ever saw in Stronghold Kingdoms, so it was interesting to see how this was all going to play out. And as it turns out, House 19 grew to be a threat pretty early on, but it did take a while for the other houses to take note of this and put aside their own differences to unite for a common goal of pretty much ridding the world of House 19, if at all possible, before they grew too powerful. But there is an alliance of sorts now between the four major powers against House 19, House 2, House 15, House 10, and House 17. They will only make peace if it is all together as a group. So in other words, you're not going to have a repeat of what happened when House 10 and House 9 were fighting House 19, and you saw House 9 attempt to make peace, or they did successfully negotiate a peace deal with House 19, but they left House 10 out in the cold, which led to House 10 being quite upset with them at that. And that led to a brief skirmish between House 10 and House 9 as those tensions escalated. So hopefully, with this deal, that will prevent a recurrence of that between these four houses that are fighting against House 19. And so that's very important to maintain their fragile alliance, because unlike House 19, they are not unified under one player, so to speak. House 19 is unified, as I said, under Spartak in 1987. House 2, House 15, House 10, and House 17 all have their own house marshals with their own ambitions, so it is not a unified vision. The only thing that actually brought them together was the fact that House 19 was such a threat. In any other scenario, like I pointed out in a couple episodes, House 10 would otherwise likely be fighting House 15 instead. Just as an update to clarify something I was unsure of last week, I mentioned that I wasn't aware of House 9's and House 11's political situation or diplomacy towards House 19. The word is that House 19 is neutral towards both of them, and although House 11 is supposedly a sister house of House 10, they are not actively fighting House 19, and neither is House 9. I would say this has a lot to do with the fact that both House 11 and House 9 were largely spent in a very destructive war between the two of them early on that didn't allow them to grow as much as other houses because they were embroiled in that little local conflict. So it is important that they get back on their feet, and I suppose their alliance houses could overlook the fact that they're not actively participating in the war effort, because you would think House 19 would be concerned about houses that are allied with House 19's enemies, but neither are attacking at the time. You might think that'd be a bit of a worry. I think that pretty much brings me down to one last point that I would like to make, and that is regarding the confidential status of the players who contact me. As anyone who has contacted me with information regarding the political state of the world can attest to, I do not disclose their names unless they expressly state they want them disclosed, nor do I disclose what could be considered confidential house information. I have had a couple of players forward me mails that I believe could be considered containing confidential house information, but I will not disclose that. What I'm interested in is diplomatic information. So I'm not looking for what they plan to do, what houses plan to do, or anything of that sort, but rather what they are doing currently, what people can currently look at the map and see they're doing. They're just not maybe aware that they are doing, these houses are doing that unless it's pointed out. That is really the extent of the information that I am largely interested in. I'm also, of course, interested in changes in diplomacy between houses. So in other words, if House 22 takes on another sister house, I'm interested in that information as well. And once again, a lot of that information would be considered in the public domain. It is just not always openly disclosed to or broadcast to all houses worldwide. So it's important to be able to disseminate this information and get it out there so other players have a better and fuller picture of what's going on in the world currently. that is the information that I'm largely concerned with in this world. And of course I would like to encourage players who think they really have anything to contribute to this report to get in contact with me in game. My in-game name is David Spy, and I do really appreciate those who take the time to go ahead and mail me and send me that information, because it does help. Even if you're just a small player, sometimes that can be, your mail is actually more truthful and genuine than the PR sort of update that you would get from the top. And case in point, this past week I sent a copy-paste letter to all 20 houses in the game currently. Now, I made them aware that this was a copy-paste letter that was going to all 20 houses. It was all above board, and I pretty much explicitly stated what I was interested in hearing from them. Of the 20 that I mailed, only 6 replied, and of those 6, only 3 showed a willingness to work with me on this. So it is difficult getting information from the top. A lot of them are not interested in speaking openly about even things that I would consider to be in the public domain. And I can understand that when you mail a house marshal, you are really talking to the top of the totem pole, so to speak. And I am pretty much a nobody in this world. If somebody takes a look at my villages, they say, who is this guy? But I did link them to my previous work, of course, so they could examine it. And if you are a player in a house and you think this report is valuable and informative, I would encourage you to show it to the rest of your faction, because they might not be all that clear about what's going on in the world either. So, if they can benefit from that, I would encourage you to share it. But the point I want you to come away with here is that I am not working for any one house behind the scenes or anything. I'm just interested in getting as clear and unbiased a picture of the world politics as possible. And the best way for me to get a well-developed picture like that is to hear from as many of you on the ground as possible, from all different houses. And that's a bit difficult when it comes to houses that don't speak English as fluently as some others. I understand that is a unfortunate discrepancy, but there are good players in those houses who do speak English and are willing to make that effort. And if you think maybe there is a player that that would really make a good envoy or something to me, encourage them. Point out that this is something that you consider to be worthwhile, that you enjoy, you find it informative, and you would like them to help me make it better. Because there's only so much I can do if people are unwilling to talk to me about what's going on. I try to be outgoing a bit. I try to encourage people to talk, but in the end, there are only 24 hours in a day, and as it turns out, even right now, I'm running an hour late on this. I usually record it an hour earlier. Well, I think that pretty much covers everything for this week. If I did leave anything important out, feel free to include it in the comment section below. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next week.
Stronghold Kingdoms. What will you fight for? Play now for free.